Welcome to our lecture on systems thinking and how systems work. So today we will be exploring the basic tenets of systems theory and discussing what some of the implications of this way of thinking would be for us as we study ecology and ecosystems. So underlying the view of systems thinking and the concepts that are involved is an acceptance of complexity. We have spoken in the class already about the fact that natural systems are by their nature filled with complexity. And in order to utilize complexity, we would in fact be recognizing the existence of multiple processes happening at the same time that could be integrated with one another or perhaps not integrated with one another and maybe even running counter to one another. And so that is one value of using systems thinking in looking at ecosystems. We can accommodate or account for that level of complexity. In addition, it also enables us to take into account and consider varying rates of change. An example of this that we have discussed recently is with looking at levels of CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere, which in turn, as a greenhouse gas, can contribute to the warming of the average Earth temperature. And so one of the things that I mentioned, that even though carbon dioxide exists in nature, so therefore in a sense it is a natural material, and it is used in photosynthesis, it is released during respiration. But the rate of release into the atmosphere that is associated with our rapid use of fossil fuels, hence capturing energy stored in plants of millions of years ago and in turn releasing it over decades as opposed to maybe a few 100,000 years that it took to accumulate and be compressed into a fossil fuel. So that's just an example of a varying rate of change. We see rates of change happening in ecosystems constantly. Change is a quality of an ecosystem. But if the rate of change is dramatically different in an ecosystem from one time to another time, that might constitute a factor that was a perturbance in that ecosystem. And also, what we learn in trying to solve environmentally related problems such as species management, interfacing in situations where we need to try to preserve a species, preserve a habitat, figure out a land use complexity. It is very useful to use a team approach, a collaborative way of looking at things, and systems thinking helps us because each member of the team brings a different perspective. And so another value of systems thinking. Now, when we are attempting to carry out an intervention or solve a problem, one of the we can learn a lot from organizational studies. And so many authors have written about organizational interventions where we see in an organization a need to change something, and then we have to figure out at what level, in what way, using which tools, how could this intervention be best done. And so in order to figure that out, we often have to account for not only the obvious primary variables, which might be evident to us at first glance, but sometimes we have to look a layer below that or two layers below that and examine some of the intervening variables or secondary effects Or sometimes in an organization, you have to look beyond the primary variables as to how a set of variables might be interacting, hence a secondary effect. And systems thinking allows us to do what I describe in the following way. You can actually, if you were an eagle flying over an area and you were looking for a food organism, you're hunting, in other words. When you are flying high and you are looking over an expanse of a very large field, you're watching for some simple movement that would indicate a prey organism that is moving. But when you are doing the dive to try to capture that prey, you're getting very close to the ground. Then you have to be very much aware of the details. You don't want to crash on the ground. You don't want to miss your prey. Your timing has to be perfect. So that is what we're doing when we use systems thinking. We're able to look at the whole system, and then we can delve down and look at the details, and then we can see how do those details affect our whole view. And then another reason why we might want to use systems thinking is we are called upon to work in teams in many walks of life. And probably in today's world, every class you take has some kind of team activity. When you move into your career path or graduate school, you will also find out that you have to have these skill sets that assist you in being a leader in your team, whether it's a project team, a design team, a conceptual team, or whatever. And so another reason why systems thinking can help us in the real world of environmental management is that it enables us to work in multidisciplinary settings. So for example, if you wanted to, perhaps we wanted to focus on how can we enhance the development of renewable energy in a given region. We might bring together businesses, both on the design side and the marketing side and the manufacturing side, with an agency that's responsible for improving energy efficiency. And so public-private partnerships or business NGO partnerships or three-way partnerships, these kind of collaborations are very common in problem solving today. Let's move to the next slide. So if we were to, I recognize that most of you have studied systems theory in one or another context. You might have studied it in an information systems course when you are learning how a computer system is structured, or an information system. You might have learned it in a computerized mapping course, a GIS course. You might have learned it in an organizational studies class, in a basic management, history of management class, where people have written about systems theory. In reality, much of the basis of systems theory grew out of studies of ecosystems, and it was a group of ecologists who first began to write about this. One man in particular, his name is Howard Odum, and Howard was an ecosystem person who studied such types of ecosystems as salt marshes, or perhaps a spring of a water spring which empties into a pond or a stream. And from the studies of basic ecology, Professor Odum came up with what he called information theory. And I'll write this first. In his information theory, Professor Odum was pointing out that there is embedded chemical information in natural ecosystems. And the complexity of the ecosystem is related to how that ecosystem stores that chemical information. And then from his studies, he himself later on began to refer to it as systems theory as opposed to information theory. It's rather ironic that it moved from that realm of science and ecology, it moved into the management and organizational studies area and was adopted as a way of looking at management, systems management. And then later when we invented our computers and our computer technology, then we came back to reinventing information systems based on systems theory. So it has long connections with the study of ecology. So what are some of the features of all systems? I think that first I probably should make one more general statement, and that is that another advantage of systems theory is that it allows us to compare systems of different types, so that you could literally compare an organism like yourself to a car, or you could compare a car to a class, or you could compare a town to a business organization, because there are certain basic structures associated with all systems. Some of these structures are the following. Systems have structure, some structure that forms a boundary around that system and sets it apart from its larger environment or setting. And so within that boundary would then be the various substructures of that system. Secondly, all systems process energy. Some process energy more slowly, i.e. a walk, and some process it more rapidly, like living things. And for example, with living organisms, if they stop processing energy, they are gone. We say that they die, that they are dead. Now we know that some animals can rest for long periods of time, for example, hibernation in animals such as bears, large mammals that essentially sleep through a very cold season. Or you can even have organisms that live in ponds that burrow down into the mud across the winter. It's not total hibernation, but they slow down their metabolism. And you have certain plants and certain other types of microorganisms that can form a seed in a plant, and that seed may rest over the winter season in cold climates and then sprout and grow in the spring. Or you could have microorganisms like protozoa that will form a cyst around the cell. It's a hard covering, and it can last through a dry season. Then when it rains again, it can reactivate. But for the most part, when living things stop processing energy, they die, and they are no longer able to come back and be an operating system. Non-living mechanical systems and various types of other energy systems, they might be able to have a longer period of time, and that without the processing of energy. For example, if your car is filled with gasoline, if you have a gasoline-powered engine, you will be able to park that car. Maybe you could leave it up to a few weeks, maybe even a few months, and you would still be able to start the car 3 months later and drive away in the car. But if you left it too long, the air might seep out of your tires. So your engine would work, but you wouldn't be able to move. Or it could be that parts of the car would seize up because the oil or grease that is keeping the moving parts working, maybe it solidifies or hardens. So in that case, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to add some energy before you could get it to work again. But if you, as a living organism, went 4 months without food, and we mean no food, then the chances are you could not go 4 months with no food. You would die, especially if you didn't have access to water. But getting back to the system characteristics, the components of a system would include inputs that come from the external environment through the boundary of the system and into the system. And then everything that takes place within the system is called throughput. And then finally, things that leave the system and go back into the environment are called output. Now, input and output are very common terms that we use. Throughput might be new to you, but it is a similar use combination of terms, meaning it's everything that's passing through and interacting within the system. Within every system, we have feedback loops. You can have feedback loops inside a system or from the system to its external environment. And these feedback loops cause the system to adjust. If the system is doing something well, the feedback loop may be a positive feedback loop and tell the system, keep doing what you are doing. You're doing it well. If it is not working for some reason, and the system is malfunctioning on account of that activity, the feedback loop may provide information that says, stop what you're doing and change and do something else. That we call a negative feedback loop. And all open systems depend on some outside source of energy. That is what causes the definition to be an open system. It depends on getting energy from the outside. This is an illustration of the points that I've just been making. We can see the boundaries of the system that make it a system because it's separated from its environment. The inputs come from the outside. The inputs must include an energy source. So sunlight will power plants in an ecosystem, and they begin the production of organic compounds, which then enter the rest of the food chain. And everything that leaves the system is called output. And as we said, you can have feedback from the external part of the system that causes the throughput to speed up, slow down, reverse, keep going. And you can also have small feedback loops within the system itself among the different subsystems that are present. So the substructure of systems then would be, as we said earlier, the inputs must include energy, but they could also, because we're talking about a lot of different kinds of systems, they could also include materials, if it's a manufacturing system, ideas, memory. All of those would be sources of energy and information for a system to operate with. The throughput is going to contain or comprise all of the processes that take place, and it is quite common in systems to have cycles that are repeated patterns of processes. So in an ecosystem, the processes could be photosynthesis, respiration, predator-prey relationships, competition, making shelter, reproducing, all the different processes that take place among the organisms in an ecosystem. The cycles could include the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the oxygen cycle, and many others. We usually emphasize those three, as well as the sulfur cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and then usually in my examples I will include some pollution cycles, because the pollutants follow the same geochemical pathways. Outputs could be desired products that the system is producing, or they could be waste materials that the system doesn't need or want. And this turns out to be a big problem in the field of environmental management, because many manufacturing systems, many commercial systems, many individual home-based systems, many mechanical things like cars and other types of transport, they are releasing waste materials which enter the atmosphere and then enter the cycles that take place on the earth. And so consequently, humans seem to produce a lot of waste materials. Another way of saying that is that humans leave a big ecological footprint, and so we need to be aware of that. Now, one type of output that I will be talking more about with future slides is the concept of entropy. And entropy refers to energy lost from a system. And as I said, I'll come back to this concept in just a bit to elaborate a bit more about the energy flow through a system. But entropy can also include deterioration of the system parts. It could include a breakdown in cycles or processes, and it could include different types of damage that might occur to a system. And so in accounting terms, in other words, in business cycles and business systems, we actually have a way that we associate a value with the breakdown of the system, and we call that depreciation. So depreciation would be a measure of entropy in a business system. Now, the feedback loops we talked about being important within the system and between the system and its external environment. And these feedback loops help the system to respond or adjust to changing conditions. And they may be purely an external loop, or much more likely it will be both internal and external loops. And we'll move to the next slide. I said that I would talk more about entropy and negative entropy. When the invention of information theory was taking place, and then later, as the systems management literature developed, we referred to energy losses as entropy losses. Now, why would we have entropy? Well, if we go back to the laws of physics that relate to energy, we learned that there are two laws of energy. The first law of energy states that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but can be changed from one form to another. When we have those changes of form, light hits a dark surface. That surface is warmed, so we have converted light energy to heat energy. If we have a book that is precariously balanced on a desk, it holds potential energy. But if it flips, excuse me for a moment. If that book flips off the desk, then we have a situation where that potential energy has been converted to kinetic energy. We also know that we can extract heat from chemical energy when we burn fuels. That is what we're doing. We're converting chemical energy to heat energy, and so on. And so the energy transformations are common, and they occur constantly in the natural world. What we have learned, and that leads to the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy, is that when those conversions occur, they're not 100% efficient. There is some loss of energy when you have the conversion. And that amount of the loss of energy during conversion is called entropy. Well, since systems have a lot of conversions happening, then entropy occurs. Now, the contrasting idea is that if you want to recapture that system, you will have to add energy back. And so we say negative entropy represents the ability of a system to get more energy. So entropy is the energy losses. Negative entropy are the energy gains. A system that is going to function well needs a little more negative entropy than entropy. And you might say, well, why can't it just be even? Well, if it's even, and there's some kind of threat to that system, it might not be able to respond. So stable systems that last for a long time generally are able to accumulate at least slightly more negative entropy than entropy. And as I mentioned earlier, entropy does include energy, in addition to energy loss, system deterioration, disorder, waste, and just in general degradation. And if you have enough entropy of the disintegrative kind, you could actually destroy the entire system. And in that case, it would lead to chaos and death of the system. Going to the next slide. Negative entropy, just following up on the same concept, negative entropy would then include structure, as opposed to entropy as disorder, or negative entropy would relate to order and energy availability. So to reiterate, entropy, energy loss, system breakdown, deterioration, disorder. Negative entropy, coming in, order, structure, and energy availability. Now, I mentioned that a system, a functioning open system, needs an excess of negative entropy. Now I would like to insert one more idea here, the idea of net energy yield. This would be comparable for some of you business students to net profit. And a system needs a certain amount of energy to keep itself in operation. If you have designed a system where you are actually trying to generate energy, i.e. an electricity production facility, then you are going to use some of the energy that comes into your electrical generation plant is going to be used to run that plant, that facility. Now, if you are measuring the yield of energy that could be taken from that generation plant, you have to subtract out those operational losses. And so, for example, about the best we can do in our electrical generation process is about 30%. The yield of an electrical generating plant will be about 30% of the fuel that went into it. We probably should keep striving for more efficiency, but that's kind of the upper end. Now, another concept to bring in is this idea of homeostasis. Now, homeostasis does refer to this balance of negative entropy and entropy. Energy losses, energy gains. And so if those are relatively in balance, and in fact if you have a little bit more negative entropy, then your system will probably be able to remain stable, respond to changes, and we say that ability to do that is called homeostasis. And what we know is that living things, as long as they can maintain life and function well, they are constantly exhibiting homeostasis. We actually list that as a quality of a living organism. By the way, let me go back for a moment to this slide. Most of the information on systems theory is corroborated by one of your readings from an organizational textbook, which is called The Structure and Function of Systems. So if you would like to read more examples and a little more detail, that would be a good reference for you. The net energy yield concept is taken from the readings that are listed on your outline by a book written by Howard Odum called Energy Basis for Mankind, or Man and Nature. I think it's Energy Basis for Man and Nature. And that also is on your reading list. And there we will be drawing other ideas and diagrams and illustrations from Energy Basis for Man and Nature. But that's where I picked up the concept net energy yield. Okay, and so then in kind of summary of the energy part of the systems theory, this listing of three types of energy or needs of energy for a system, this is my own thinking And so you will find a good reading on it. I mean, you will certainly, the idea is embedded in your readings, but I actually made the list of 3. And I never wrote a paper on that one, so you'll have to take my word for it. But obviously, a system needs enough energy for operations. So I call that operational energy. In addition, systems are constantly getting bombarded with change and perturbance, and so they need energy for emergency response. And third, they need even more energy when they are growing and elaborating. Now we do know it is a common system characteristic that the system will get bigger, and the bigger it gets, the more elaborate it has to get, the more levels of organization will be present. And so consequently, it takes energy to create additional levels. It takes energy for the parts of a system to coordinate with one another. So consequently, that is why I arrived at this conclusion that all 3 of these are important energy needs for a system. Now I would draw for a comparison, again, for most of you have some business course background. When you study about small businesses and the dynamics of small businesses, one of the things that you learn is that most small businesses fail within the first 5 years of operation. And the usual reason that they can't quite make it is they did not apply or provide or have in stock enough money for operations, emergency response, and then if they're successful and they grow too rapidly, they didn't have enough set aside to deal with the exigencies of that growth and the need for elaboration. So that raises an interesting question, that money and energy both flow through systems. They follow the same pathways and they go in opposite directions. So you need to, for human systems, whether they're manufacturing, mechanical, organizational, business, government, you have to pay money to get energy, and it takes energy to generate profit. So we say that money and energy go through systems along the same paths, but in opposite directions. So as we do have a system grow and elaborate, then we discover that we need more levels of organization. Again, if you wanted to use your small business example, your small pizza restaurant is extremely successful. You didn't have any major perturbances to begin with. You're growing nicely, and you decide you will have 2 pizza restaurants, and then 3, and then 4. And soon, once you have 5 or 6 different establishments, you are going to need a more complex and larger management structure. You, as a single owner, are not going to be able to keep your eye on and your hand in 8 different branch restaurants of your pizza business. So then you have to hire additional people. Then you have to coordinate among the different levels of your business organization. And you have to have good information processes. Well, it's the same in all systems. The more elaborate they are, the more levels of organization are needed, and the more coordination. We can also see this in the development of a fetus as it turns in. Well, first it starts as a fertilized egg, and then it becomes that, we call that the zygote. It then goes through stages of embryonic development until the fetus begins to look like a human, if you see a picture of it. And then by the time the baby is actually born, it's a little tiny human. Now, in the human species, we actually spend a long time raising our babies until they reach adulthood. Some animals have only a few months to do that, or maybe a year, or a much shorter time. But during that process of the fetal development, we go from a single cell forming 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells. We go step by step until the entire elaboration of all the body systems forms from that original single cell, the fertilized. Now, as systems become more complex and they need information system, the coding of the information must match the system. So if you are talking about an ecosystem with chemical cues that tell, help predators find prey organisms to eat, help the prey to find the plants that they want to eat, to have the breeding and reproductive processes take place, that all living things are using chemical codes, things like the nucleic acids, the hormones, the enzymes. And then, of course, humans also have an ability to ideate, and so that doesn't mean we're idiots, it means we can think and have ideas. The information coding for human interaction would be words, or the information within a computer system will be some type of computer code. Or if we are corresponding between two languages, now we use our computers and we say, please convert this to Chinese. Now, it might not be a perfect conversion, but you can at least share simple. You get a basic understanding with that ability to change from one language to another. And then if we're going to be interacting in a culture in some depth, then we learn the language that's common there. So we have more levels, need more coordination, we need information, and the information must be coded properly, and then we have to integrate the system parts in order for the system to work well. And I think that leads us to just a couple more characteristics of systems to finish off. I mentioned the importance of these repetitive cycles of activity or cycles of events, and they could be daily, which we call diurnal cycles. We could have nighttime cycles, which are called nocturnal. We can have seasonal patterns, such as when we talk about vernal pools forming in the springtime. The vernal refers to spring. And then we can have cycles that are associated with feeding or trophic dynamics. And then, of course, we have reproductive cycles. So systems have many cycles. And if we look at organization systems, then if it's a business system, we might have accounting cycles, we might have human resource management cycles, we might have yearly cycles. And then if we are tracking materials that move through a system, we might have an inventory system that has cycles. So the number of cycles, the type of cycles, the illustration of the cycles are related to the complexity of the system and its relative stage of development. More elaborate systems have more cycles. And our last characteristic of systems that we'll call attention to is an idea called equifinality. Equifinality is pretty simple. It means equal endings following different pathways. So you can have an endpoint that's similar between two systems. They can be widely separated. You could have a grassland that was in Africa. You could have a grassland that was in South America, and you could have a grassland in the middle of the U.S. prairie area. In each case, these grasslands will be different in their details, but they all function as grasslands. And we actually give them different names. So we talk about the African savanna, and we talk about a pampas in South America, but we would call it a plain, the plains or the prairies in the United States. But they are all three types of grasslands. If you wanted to compare to two human careers, one person might get a college degree, gain a lot of experience, and then use those learned skills so that they could become the head of a business organization. Another person might work their way up through that organization, learning all the basic skills they need until they are the owner or manager of that business. And both of those businesses could be quite successful. We always make a joke that when you're talking about yourself, then you are quite comfortable that you know exactly the way to do something. And so when you want to give advice to someone else, you tell them how it should be done. But when they want to tell you how something should be done, you say, I think I'll do it my way. So that's equifinality. You can do things different ways and end up with the same endpoint. And so what we learn in general is that systems that have well-developed hearts and are, all these characteristics that we've just described, they probably have a greater chance for stability. And so with that, I thought I would just illustrate a few different kinds of open systems. I think I've referred to most of them in our discussion today. The mechanical systems, biological, ecological, organizational, or even the entire planet, the entire universe, the oceans. So a system can be, there are many, many types of systems, but these basic characteristics apply to all of those systems. So what I had suggest that you do to sort of practice this way of thinking, choose a system that is familiar to you, and then draw a diagram to show the inputs, the throughputs, the processes, and label it, and then figure out what type of system you have and how complex it is, and then give an example of a change intervention that might work well. So you can do this as a participation assignment and send it to me. I think posting it on the digital Dropbox would be the best way to do it, and you have a couple weeks to do this. I'll try to put it right on our course outline when it is due. And with that, I would ask you for questions if you were here with me today, but since you're not, I will just stop here and leave you to ask your questions later. Thank you so much. Bye.